to flip the recording upside down. So we're going to be talking about a subject um, that was asked in several groups I've seen, mostly the Basic Fantasy RPG group. Uh, I haven't necessarily had this question asked to me, but be that as it may, everybody seems to have an opinion of it, and that is running raw. So I want to give a quick preface that there's a lot of people out there that are running these games for the first time, and by these games I simply mean tabletop RPGs in general. Obviously, coming from computer games going over to tabletop games where you have more human interaction is a little bit different. It's can seem like culture shock, and a lot of people have this false idea that you must run raw all the time. That's a very subjective idea, and I'm going to explain why. So, as always, guys, thank you for joining me tonight on Kentucky Rex Channel. I want to remind everybody that if you're interested in hearing my thoughts and opinions, in particular about religious subjects, my Religious Rex channel is up. And I will be advertising for it on this channel until it gets enough views or subscribers to essentially stand on its own, and I can actually advertise it there. But it is May. We're going to continue on with the subject tonight. What's up, Steve? So we're going to talk about running raw. So the idea of running raw. So a lot of first-time game masters just kind of have this idea. They have this nervousness about running raw all the time, and I think when especially if there's somebody coming over from modern systems, they believe that they have to have a particular book memorized. And so if you want my opinion, like, on whether somebody should run raw or not, I'm going to say yes, but with a caveat. So by that I mean that this is going to be a more nuanced topic than what a lot of people give it credit for. It's very subjective to run things raw. After all, a lot of these systems, especially Basic Fantasy RPG, have a little bit of vagaries within the rules text, so that it's up to game master interpretation. And so what you should realize is that however you rule a particular thing, you should do your best to write it down. That way you can run it consistently in the future. After all, Basic Fantasy RPG and games like it do not consider certain nuances that might come up during play, whether a player asks about a particular question. And Chris Gonerman acknowledges that because of the simple fact that a particular thing exists on the website, and it's the Glane Companion, which is his particular personal collection of house rules that he runs for his games. And I have them downloaded. I don't really necessarily use them. I let them in my Tuesday/Thursday group. The classes and the races are there as an option if they wish to use them. Other than that, the rules, any rules that come about from me, not from the Glane Companion. And so that running raw is a very subjective thing. So especially when it comes to Basic Fantasy RPG in particular. So for example, Basic Fantasy happens to have in the back some optional rules, death saves, goal for XP, and stuff like that. If you ask me if I use those, yes, I do. When it comes to death saves, for example, my players get a daily death save where they must save versus death ray, or they die. And what's up?
I don't know. Are you making a video?
Yeah, I am.
Are you kidding me?
You're fine. Here.
You made another video.
Yeah, the other one didn't take good. Give me a second here.
Me neither.
I promise it won't take long.
Also, it might because I have free in case.
Okay.
Haha.
Okay. Anyways, so goal for XP is another one. See, I particularly rule that because the rules don't necessarily give a whole lot on that particular rule.
Oh.
But gold is XP. If you are a human or half human, you do not get an XP bonus from gold. You only get it from monsters. I'm a big fan of asymmetrical leveling. I'm fine with that. But I believe that kind of taking away that from the gold, because honestly, some sessions happen to be a little bit more gold happier than others. Taking that away, and that kind of helps keep everybody within the same street, you know. So, and that's my opinion. Another instance in which I don't necessarily run raw all the time is if you are a first time player in my campaign, your first character will be 3d6 straight down the line. You get maximum amount of HP possible at level 1. If your first character dies, they can't retire or quit, they have to die. Then your second character can be rolled up, and the stats can be allotted how you wish. And that's what I did when my party TPK'd at session 1. So, and there's another example in which raw is very subjective. I ran raw on session 1, and then when it came to the second characters, I didn't necessarily run raw. So I used my own house rule on that. So I realized that, number one, when you're talking about raw, it's a very subjective thing. Something that I want to point out is I was watching this video of Tim Kask, and Tim Kask he was at GaryCon. He was talking about this particular instance in which a player got a magical item, and he needed to figure out how to get off of him because it was honestly breaking his game. He got a little bit magic item happy with his first campaign, and well, this particular character decided to cast polymorph on themselves in basically a 10 by 10 by 10 room, and they were crushed to death because of, I can't remember if it was necessarily what they were wearing or if it was because they were in a 10 by 10 by 10 room, but point being, they were crushed to death. But however, there were plenty of examples where old school DMs will say that they, if somebody didn't take their plate armor off and decided to become a dinosaur of some kind, like a T-Rex, then they were crushed to death under the weight and the sturdiness of their own armor. So that's another example in which I wouldn't necessarily run it that way. The rules are vague enough to where I don't believe you would have to rule it that way, but that's all up to DM interpretation, right? So the rules are vague enough for you to figure that out and to rule it a particular way. Just realize that when you make a particular rule on something, you must remain consistent to each and every player. So however you rule it, which I usually give a little caveat, if there's not necessarily a rule about it, but I need to come up with one on the fly, I will actually be honest with my players and say, I'm going to roll it this way right now. I'm going to think about this after the game is over. Then I'll have a more consistent rule. And so I actually have like a list of house rules in my Discord channel of like, it's like 10 Commandments style only. I think we're at like 12, 13 house rules, which is not terrible considering that the game has gone on for 9 sessions. We're getting ready to hit session 10 pretty soon. So, not terrible, so, and it's basically just nuances off of questions that were asked. It's not necessarily revisions of existing rules, but like, hey, what if I want to defend my buddy over here? I just want to put my shield up and I want to guard him, put him behind me and kind of keep up like surely that would help my AC. And so I'd say, yeah, it helps your AC. And I came up with a rule for that. So, and of course, holding action or passing turn, I decided that, that sounds fine. Like you decide you want to take up a strategic position and wait for a particular enemy to do something. And then like let's say like you're going to pull out your bow, aim it down the hallway. You're waiting for the enemy to come down. So you're not going to free that arrow yet. You want to wait for them to move in, and that's fine. So, that's just an example. So that's an example of house ruling something. And so that's not necessarily raw, but it's not exactly contrary to raw now, is it? So that's just an example of something that I do. Now, some rules may not work for you, and, that's, up to you. Personal opinion, I believe that if you're going to run a game system for the first time you should run raw as best as you can interpret. Just remember to remain a consistency to it so that it's fair for everybody involved, because that's essentially why rules are important. You need it to be consistent with everybody involved, so that no hurt feelings or nothing like that. Um, a good a good example would be a good example would be how somebody like gets help with performing a particular action. Like, let's say they need help crossing a gap because they're wearing heavier armor than somebody else. Well, then that's something that needs to be remained consistently. Now, if you're not sure how you wish to, honestly, honesty is the best policy with your players. So, like, saying, I don't know how to rule this yet, but I do want to come up with a rule for this. So, we're going to run it like this for now, and then I'm going to have a more solid rule for the future. Just be honest. That's all you have to do, really. Particular instances where Raw may not work out for you is some people don't like the rule that if a magic user is attacked before they can cast their spell, that they lose their spell slot if they fail a save. Some people don't like that rule. Now, I run it, I just haven't had that opportunity come up yet. I haven't had that opportunity come up yet in play. So, I would say, if that's a rule that you don't like, you don't have to play it. It's one rule, right? But that's just me. A lot of people don't even realize that's a rule because it's kind of snuggled in there in the magic user spell list. So they don't even realize it's a rule because they glance over that section. But it's there, and it is a rule. That's all up to your interpretation or how you wish to run your game. You may not even have magic users in your campaign. I mean, who's to say? It all depends on your setting, right? But, that's where I say a lot of these rules kind of live and die, is by the feel of the setting. What kind of setting are you wishing to run? You might not even be running a magical setting at all. You could easily take these rules and turn them into a medieval historical thing. So for example, there's not really rules about factions in the rule book. You just kind of have to figure that out yourself. So like I plan on putting in Anglovan some factions. For example, on the continent of Fjern, I'm going to have a king that's going to be loosely based off of the real life King James the first of England, the sixth of Scotland, and it's going to really come down to he's going to have a similar situation of the Hampton Court Conference, where the Puritans and the Anglicans were at a very hot debate, and so I'm going to have that kind of religious faction thing come into play there. I'm also going to use real life examples of real life inspiration. Take real life inspiration from the Glasgow Razor gangs. So like obviously very sectarian. And so I'm going to put that in my particular setting for a couple of street gangs that are up to no good and are prejudiced against certain kinds of people and, based on either their race or their views. So that's another one. And by and large, there's no rules for factions in the rule book. So how does the faction work? That's up to you. But I'm starting to kind of ramble, so I'm going to get back to my point of rules as written. So, I think, in my opinion, when people make a concrete answer of yes or no on this, it comes from a big mistake, okay? And that is that when somebody says, yes, absolutely, you have to run rules as written 100% of the time, what they fail to realize is they fail to remember that certain rules like spells have these nuances to them and vagaries in which the game master has to make a ruling anyway. And so is it technically raw then? That's up to your interpretation of raw. I think where it comes from is from especially modern OSR guys, especially dudes my age, coming into the hobby, and that they're trying to be as anti-5e as possible. Because 5e is like a lot of dungeon masters from 5e or rather loosey-goosey with the rules. Everything from dice fudging to I mean, just kind of like throwing the rules out the window and, just making sure that they have a story game. Now, number one, I want to say this. This is the only time I'm going to really defend 5e to a degree. There's nothing, in my opinion, wrong with running a story-driven game if that's what your thing is and that's what the characters wish to do. Go for it. In my opinion, if you're going to run a story-driven game, there's better things out there besides Dungeons and Dragons for that, because there's particular games, story games that were made for that purpose that can do that a lot better. Because Dungeons and Dragons and games that are like Dungeons and Dragons are based off of like exploration and combat, and so the possibility of player character death and failure. So, in my opinion, you're looking in the wrong place if you're looking for a story game, but that's me. But anyways, so here's my thing. I don't run my games to be as anti-5e as possible. 5e is the least of my worries when I'm running my games. I'm trying to run a fair but entertaining game.
Oh, Dad.
What's up?
This score is really itchy, and it's not supposed to be itchy.
It's not supposed to be itchy?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. And it also hurts when I itch it.
Does it?
Yes.
Oh. Well, we'll see if we can't find some. I'm sure we got like calamine lotion or something right here. We'll find you some here in a little bit.
Okay.
But anyways, 5e is nowhere on my radar when I run my games. At all. So as much as I would like to tell Wizards to blow it out their hind end, that's not why I'm running my game. I'm not running my game to stick it to Wizards. I'm not running my game to be contrary to all the weird neon colored haired people that are part of the 5e community, or whatever you want to call it. That's not what the point of my games is. The point of my games is to run a fair but fun game for my players. And so I believe that the modern take of you must absolutely 100% of the time run raw is a knee-jerk reaction to being as anti-5e as possible.
Dad,
And
I think I found your YouTube account.
yep, that's me. But anyways, that's not why I run my games.
Can I
Because-
subscribe to you?
Yeah, go ahead, honey.
Thank you.
That's not why I run my games. I run my games to be fair, and 5e is the last thing on my mind.
Oh, it's already subscribed.
I don't need any, I don't need to bring any politics or philosophy into my games of sticking it to Wizards. It's not my interest. And so I believe that the obsession with trying to be as anti-5e as possible, that's why a lot of people say you must run raw all the time, where I say that that's not necessarily entirely possible. It's possible to try your best. It's possible to run as close to raw as you can. But again, the nuances and how you're going to rule certain things within, like spell descriptions, for example, just something as simple as that, is going to make running raw 100% impossible. Excuse me. Especially if you make use of the optional rules in the back. Because is that technically raw or not? Or is that supplementary material? In my opinion, who cares? That's just how I see it. In my opinion, who cares? That's me. Let's see. What else can I say about this before I sign off? At the same time, the rules are there for a reason. So don't mistake this as me saying the rules don't matter. They absolutely 100% do. And I try my best to run as close to raw as possible. Again, I have certain nuances that come about from play, from players asking questions, that the rules don't necessarily cover. And so I have to come up with a ruling on that. But I have to be consistent with my rulings. So, number one, if something like that comes up into play, especially if you're a new game master and you don't know what to say, honesty is the best policy. Hey, I don't know how I'm going to run this in the future. For now, we're going to run it this way. From 40 years of play, I think I'm incapable of running any game right. So like that's the whole point, right? Like everybody thinks that you have to run, like running raw by the books is like, everybody for whatever reason thinks it's possible, but it's not. Because the books can't possibly come up with. It's just like, let's take video games for example. You can never have a true open world video game because a video game is limited to whatever the developers have programmed into it. For example, one of my favorite games is, especially newer games, is Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Sandbox game on the Switch. I've got it. And it is so sandbox, and you could go and do whatever. 43 years. Memory is getting fuzzy in my old age. What's up, Steve? I love seeing you come in, bud. But so, anyways, like as sandboxy as it is and open-ended as it is not a true open world game because it cannot it cannot be programmed to you wanting to do whatever you want with Link, for example. Like, you might want Link to, it's limited to that program. And so let's just take the books as an example. Let's just say they're like a video game. They are programmed in a certain way in which the developer can see and give you a starting point, but you must be the one to add on certain specifics and things. Obviously, the question of building a house or building a fort comes up. My players for my Tuesday, Thursday night group, they're interested in that. So, there you go. I mean, really. So, I guess just don't be too concerned. Don't get too wrapped up into the argument of whether you should run raw or not. Just play the game. Run the rules as close as possible to raw as you can so that you maintain a level of consistency, because that's the name of the game, consistency and fairness. And don't sweat it if you make a mistake. We're all human. That's just the nature of the game. We're playing a very human game. So, honestly, I believe the culture and the counterculture attached to 5e right now is what has made this topic and several like it so hard for people to really talk about and figure out. And does Raw encourage rules lawyering from players? It can. My opinion, because I've never had it happen to me, is that number one, you must always remember that if you are the game master, you are the rules. What you say goes. You are the arbiter, you are the judge. And so if you rule it a specific way, then the rules lawyer has to shut up because they're just going to kill the fun. One of the first things, because I have one group that is going to run OSE as a play-by-post, and the guy wanted me to be a player, and he wanted me to fill a rules lawyer niche. And I said, I can kind of call into question remembrances and how rules are written. I said, but ultimately, that's going to be up to you, my man. Like, I don't have any interest in being a rules lawyer. So, like, can Raw encourage rules lawyering? It can. But I think also the lack of the negligence can also lead to that as well, if you get my meaning. Because ultimately it comes down to how you like. That's something that needs to be set down from the beginning. Is that I'm the authority. It's one thing for a game master to admit he made a mistake, but like that comes with, you do have to have some kind of assertiveness. Now, this is not, don't mistake this for me saying you must be a butt. This is not me saying that. But you must maintain a level of assertiveness if you're going to be a game master. And I realize that with some people, personality-wise, that might not necessarily be what they're interested in. They might not want to do that. I get that, because they like to be as low conflict as possible. But you also can't let one player, you can't let a player run a game. So that's my opinion on it. Rules lawyering I should come up with a video on that one, so that I can talk about it more in depth. But rules lawyering, to a degree, yeah. Raw, in my opinion, a rules lawyer is going to be a rules lawyer no matter whether Raw is involved or not. And so I'm here to say that being 100% consistent with Raw is not possible. You can only run Raw in what you have ruled and remain, again, the name of the game, consistency. Maintain consistency. Hey, thank you, Todd. Thank you for interacting, brother. So, I mean, that's the name of the game, is consistency. Just maintaining that, because the point of the game is to be fair. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. And so if it's good for one player, it must be good also for another player. So I used Tim Kask's example earlier of the player that got squished by casting Polymorph. That sets a precedent. Now, any character that puts themselves in that situation, that casts Polymorph to try to transform into a big creature like that, they also must now run that risk of being crushed. So, maintaining a level of consistency. It's his famous dragon spam room, I believe is what it was called. Somebody tried to, I think they tried to turn themselves into a dragon, and they end up getting crushed in a 10 by 10 by 10 room.
Oh.
So, yeah. So really, that's honestly all I can think to say for the for this subject. So, join me next time. I don't know what I'm going to talk about next. I might do another Fellowship of the Ring of Protection video this week. I'm not sure yet. If you guys are interested in hearing me talk about religion, I have created another channel for that. It is Religious Rex, and I will be, until it gets enough viewers and subscribers to actually stand on its own and actually use the community table and advertise itself, I'm going to be advertising for it on this channel through some posts and stuff like that, and share the videos on here. That way, they get some traffic, if that interests you.
Dad, look what I made.
Yeah, look at that.
It's a block.
It is a block.
Cool, isn't it?
Uh-huh. So, there's that. I also want to urge that, because I'm trying to call attention to it, if you have the time, if you have the money to spend, I do want to urge my viewers to try to give to St. Jude's Children's Hospital. Don't send money to me. I'm there too. I'll look for it after the stream. So, thanks, Steve. I do want to urge, if you have the time and if you have the money, it's not going to break the bank, to give to St. Jude's Children's Hospital, which is a charity that I care immensely about. And I do plan on doing a 24-hour stream. However, I decide I'm not going to do Bloodborne. I'm going to probably do something more kid-friendly. I might do, I don't know, I have some Pokemon games. I have some Zelda games. I don't know.
Oh, I love Pokemon.
I know you do.
You should probably do a Pokemon.
Once I figure out how to stream it. So, I might do a 24-hour of that. So really, keep an eye out for that. I'm going to be doing that and advertising St. Jude's Children's Hospital with that. So I guess, as always, guys, join me next time. I can't really think of any subject I'm going to talk about next. Probably the faction thing. I brought the faction thing up earlier. So, using real-world examples. For example, the Hampton Court Conference of, I think it was 1603 or 1604. I can't remember. But it was it was two religious factions, the Puritans and the Anglicans. And oddly enough, the end result was both parties kind of won their cases, and by the end of it, a new translation of the Bible into English was authorized, which comes into our modern hands as the King James Bible. So that's an interesting part of history, from two religious factions before a king, and this is kind of what and led up to probably the most widely read book in the world. Um, and I also brought up the Glasgow Razor Gangs, which is a touchy subject, especially for those of our friends in the United Kingdom, especially in Scotland, live in the Glasgow area, where that's a touchier part of history. I'm not necessarily going to go into detail on. However, the sectarianism, um, which is something that us as fallen men um, have had to deal with, and so like using that as a basis for creating some little criminal gangs in my setting. Uh, so I might touch on factions a little bit more broadly rather than in specific, uh, because when Gary Gygax made Keep on the Borderlands, there was actually a faction thing going on with the monsters in the Caves of Chaos. So because you had all these weird, it was like a zoo in a cave, really. So um, I think I'm going to talk about factions next. But as always, guys, I'm going to sign off. So take care. God bless. See you on the other side. Once I can get that to close out. There we go.